What you gonna do with all those books up on that shelf? Everybody, it is now 2023, which means the 2022 is over, and it is time to recap all of the books that I read in 2022. Normally, I would do a tier ranking for all of the books that I read, but I decided that since you like to watch me struggle and pit my favorite books against each other, and you enjoy the physical pain that it causes me because you are monsters, I decided what was a way that I could possibly make this harder on myself, and I came up with a bracket challenge. I know essentially nothing about sports or seeding or brackets, so what I did was I googled bracket maker, and then I put in all of the books that I read in 2022, and then I hit the random button on the seed maker or whatever, so it completely randomized them. So there is no like top seed, bottom seed, where like the books that I definitely love are going to get safe passes. They may fight each other in the early rounds, and it may end up in a really weird finale round where my favorite books didn't make it. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm frankly nervous. Please note that I did lump the series that I read into one entry, which I know bothers some of you, but I don't give a frick today because this is still going to hurt. And also there are 11 books in the Cradle series, like I freaking would remember what's in every single one. I'm not that kind of guy. What do you take me for? I have not looked at the seeding. I don't know what's going to be facing what in what round. I also do know that since there is an uneven number of books, I think there are 19 contestants today, some books may get a buy round, and those books maybe don't deserve the buy round. I don't know how this is supposed to work, but you get to watch it unfold. So welcome to the 2022 book battle bracket. If you like this format and you want to see me do more book battle brackets, please hit that like button. You can hit the subscribe if you like these videos, and comment down below what you think as we go. Let me know what rounds are an absolute travesty and what ones I got right. All right, let's jump into round one.
Round one, fight!
All right, first things first, we're getting it kicked off with two books that I had a great time with. The first battle of the 2022 book battle is Crooked Kingdom versus Wistful Ascending. Note these are only the books that I read in 2022, so the Six of Crows book is not included here, but we're talking about Crooked Kingdom, the book that I titled the review Guardians of the Galaxy, but make it Hot Topic, which I feel like is a very accurate description of the tone of this book. It is the sequel to the YA heist book starring the Six of Crows. It's like this gang of young teenagers that run gangs against other gangs of teenagers. It's really a blast of a series, and it has a mood to it, and that mood is hardcore emo late 2000s style, which you may know I am very privy to. I was a teen in the 2000s. And let me tell you, friends, I'm not, because I think that this book ended the series very well, and it made me very interested in more in Leigh Bardugo's world, the Grishaverse. Grishaverse? I felt so many things and I had so many emotions during the reading of Crooked Kingdom. I put it off so long and there was really no reason to do that. I read the Six of Crows and just now got along to reading the finale here, and it was a blast. On the other hand, Wistful Ascending by J.C.M. Byrne is one of the books that I read for SPFBO 8. This is a book about like a science fantasy, science fiction story where superheroes are real and there are aliens, and this takes place on a space station. There's really, really good character work, excellent world building here. This book was in the running for me to pick it as a semi-finalist for SPFBO 8. I absolutely loved this book. I was absolutely blown away by how I got invested into this book very quickly, and I love the world that was presented, not just its characters, but also its plot. There's a lot of mysteries going forward, and I'm curious to see where we will go from here. This book also ended in a way that flipped a lot of tropes on their head in a way that felt good and was surprising and fresh at the same time. So essentially we have a battle between my childhood nostalgia and the things that I've always loved throughout my life, and Wistful Ascending, also things I've loved throughout my life because I enjoy a really good superhero story, and seeing it implemented in the way that J.C.M. Byrne did in his book was just a blast. And so I'm going to have to go with gut reaction. Which of these books am I most excited about and passionate now after the fact? And as much as I loved Crooked Kingdom and Six of Crows, this one has to go to Wistful Ascending. I want to know what happens in the rest of this trilogy. I want to know what happens in the rest of this world. And if we're just going on positive vibes and things that I'm most excited to experience more of, it's going to be Wistful Ascending, winning round one. Congratulations to J.C.M. Byrne for beating out Leigh Bardugo in round one of the 2022 book battle. Let's move on to round two. Round 2 is a very strange round. It's not really a fair round because these books are very much incomparable in every way. The first book in round 2 is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I have a full video review for this book. It is excellent and it is insightful. It's also heartbreaking and disgusting. I'm Glad My Mom Died is the memoir from Jeanette McCurdy about her life growing up as a child star. You probably recognize her from Nickelodeon TV shows such as iCarly. Her childhood upbringing was essentially one person abusing her after another, and the complex relationship between her and her mother when her mother was very unhealthy and leading her down a very bad path. And we're of course familiar with one side of the story, the public facing side of the story. This is what happened behind the scenes, and part of this story has been shared if you've watched interviews with her throughout the years, but it really is just a tragic tale, but it's very telling to what happens to child stars in Hollywood and how corrupt that system is. I think this is a very important message that needs to get out there, and I'm very glad I made the video review for it that I did. If you're interested, I would suggest watching that video or just reading the book to get the first-hand information. The book that it's going up against is The Stones of Voltara. The Stones of Voltara was an SPFBO 8 book, part of a competition where I was one of the under judges in a competition to select some of the best self-published books of last year. This book was subtitled in the series For the Love of the Gods, and it is an excellent multi-layered story that contains more twists and turns than you think is possible, but they're so satisfying, and the world itself has so many secrets that are revealed and so many more to go. It's the first book of I don't know if it's supposed to be a trilogy or a series, but this was my selection for the semi-finalist. I absolutely loved this book. When it comes to self-published books, you never know what you're going to get because the market is open. Anybody can publish them. But The Stones of Voltara really blew me away because it was just so many things at once. In fact, some people had the problem that the plot was too complicated and there were too many layers and too many things popping off at once. But for me, that was just sweet. And here's the problem for this book battle is one of these books is important in real life. It tells a lot of very important societal things that I think are valuable for people to know to enact real change in the world. And the other one is a really good fantasy book that I love and I want more people to read. But I think for the purposes of this competition, this may sound very pithy. For the purposes of this competition, we're gonna have to give it to The Stones of Voltara. It fits the other books that we're gonna be comparing it against better. And I'm trying to keep this video more upbeat and lighthearted. So moving forward in round 2 is going to be The Stones of Voltara. Congratulations, another indie book defeats another published book.
Round 3.
The final matchup in this first round, we'll call it the placement round, I guess. I don't really know what this stuff is supposed to be. But the final battle that's happening in this section is going to be the Lunar Chronicles versus Blake Crouch's Upgrade. Now, I'm a huge fan of Blake Crouch. Blake Crouch books are some of my favorite books to look forward to and binge through every single year. And his way of telling science fiction thrillers at a breakneck pace in ways that also stick with me because I love the ways that he plays with the science to get this popcorn thriller, crazy action flick kind of thing of a book. The difference was that Upgrade tried to balance that with also trying to be a little bit more like speculative fiction, trying to have a message, tell more of, society and things that are bad about society. It was a more traditional classic science fiction look done by Blake Crouch, was to say it tried to balance that with the breakneck action pace of his other books. And I feel like the combination of those two things didn't always work. I really enjoyed the book, but it definitely was not a standout, especially compared to his other works. Whereas the Lunar Chronicles is a YA series from yesteryear that I finally finished this year. I think I finished about half of it this year. I read the first 2 books and then there's 2 books and a novella. I read those this year and I was just blown away by the Lunar Chronicles as a young adult fairy tale science fiction retelling of classic stories, and the way that it managed to both balance telling the fairy tale classic stories and the way that it twisted the tropes on their head and made the characters memorable and had the characters from different fairy tales interact with each other, all during this massive epic plot of a battle between the people on Earth and the people of the moon who are bad. This book warmed my heart and it made me wonder why more people are not talking about this series today. I loved the Lunar Chronicles. And given the fact that it's going against Blake Crouch's Upgrade, a book that I was very much anticipating, but then was a little bit disappointed by, this round is going to go to the Lunar Chronicles. We'll see how far Marissa Meyer can go when we get to it in the next round. All right, we have finished the easiest set of rounds. And before we get into the next round, I want to go ahead and give a message to our sponsors. I don't have sponsors, but what I do want to say is there There's a Discord, which is linked down below in the description, and that Discord is where a lot of my friends who I love to talk about books with every day hang out. There's channels discussing many popular science fiction and fantasy series down there. There's also a general hangout channel where we just have a lot of fun talking about memes and jokes and whatever. If you want to be part of that community, I highly suggest you check out the Discord. As I said, it's linked down below. I would love to have more conversations with you about this video and this topic of what books should have beat other books, as well as any other freaking reading related topic you want to talk about. Sponsor segment done. Next up, the first round of actually pick a semi-finalist. If I understand brackets correctly, the semi-finalists, there's going to be 8 remaining after this round. And starting off, we're revisiting a book series that we saw in the previous round. This battle round is going to be Mistborn Era 2, which I reread all of and then caught up to with the Lost Metal, versus Wistful Ascending. Mistborn Era 2 is part of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, his greater collection of interconnected worlds and series. And Mistborn Era 2 takes place hundreds of years after the first Mistborn trilogy. And it's almost an entirely different genre, though it contains the same world and the same magic systems. Mistborn Era 2 is unique in the fantasy realm in my experience, in that it's steampunky. Technology is just sort of being invented. Characters now have guns. It's got a Wild Westy theme sometimes. And the tone is one of like a B movie, action movie, campy movie. I believe in one of my reviews, I called it a fantasy burn notice. And Mistborn Era 2 is just one of my favorite series. It's one of my favorite parts of the Cosmere, of which I already love. The way that the book maintains a tone of just absolute fun and adventure, while also occasionally reaching deeper things, is just incredible. I love Sanderson's character work in this book. These characters are some of my favorite in the Cosmere, and the Lost Metal allowed us to see even more Cosmere connections within the Mistborn Era 2 world, even though I was slightly disappointed or confused by the way that this one ended, and I do have a full video review if you're interested in checking that out. I still very much had a great time with the Lost Metal, book 4 in this set. I do want to use this opportunity now to shout out Wistful Ascending again. This is a self-published book about a superhero spaceman in an excellent world with really cool characters and a lot of interesting mysteries. I really want you people to check it out, and I want to check out the rest of the series, but I'm going to have to give this round to Mistborn Era 2. And yes, that one hurt. The next battle is between Dead Man's Hand and Any Minor World. Dead Man's Hand by James J. Butcher is an urban fantasy in the modern era, starring a reluctant wizard who has powers but is sort of an outcast from the world of wizarding society. He's down on his luck. If that all sort of sounds familiar to you, and the name sounds familiar to you, James J. Butcher is the son of Jim Butcher of the Dresden Files fame. I feel like a lot of times when there are children that grow up under the wing of a famous parent, they very much try to distance themselves from their parent in major and drastic ways, and it seems like James is going the opposite route. He is writing an urban fantasy, which is the same genre of the Dresden Files, and if you actually take the pieces and separate them, like step back a little bit, it actually has a lot of the same framing of the Dresden Files, and the characters share a lot of traits as the characters in the Dresden Files. That being said, I don't think it actually feels derivative. I just feel like it is sort of another book in the same genre with somewhat of a similar tone. Like some of the comedy is similar. I will say the difference in Dead Man's Hand and the Dresden Files, which I love. I constantly talk about how I love the Dresden Files, but I also, there's a meme that I hate the Dresden Files. I think that this book, at least so far, mostly avoids the pitfalls of the Dresden Files. The sort of male-gazy aspects are definitely not as present here as they are in Harry's mind. Even though a lot of the juvenile sort of blue-collar humor is still in this book, I think it's done a little bit more tastefully. It could just be because it's someone from a more modern generation with more modern sensibilities telling a similar type of story. It definitely didn't have some of the same pitfalls in the first book that Harry Dresden might have had in his first book in the early 2000s. It also is really funny, and it also is really a blast. I don't think it's doing anything groundbreaking, but it's a very solid first published book. I really had a lot of fun with it. Any Minor World was another independently published book that I was a judge for at SPFBO 8. Any Minor World uses one of my favorite tropes, which is where a character sort of is able to write things down that come to life, and that is a trope that I love. Any Minor World is one of the books that I was looking forward to most in SPFBO 8, but it is not one that I loved as much as I wanted to. That being said, it was still solid. It really tries to aim for a bigger scope than I think it's able to succeed with, but it also approaches it from a tone that is very much like a comic book style. Not like a super dark and modern comic book style, but a little bit more lighthearted most of the time. It also tries to approach themes that are heavier and tries to like approach them from a way that's philosophical at points. And I think it succeeds at that to varying degrees. That being said, as a total package, I didn't love it. I wasn't hooked. I didn't need to read the next one immediately, but it's still worth checking out if you want to hear about it more. I am curious to see where the series can go moving forward, but out of these 2 books, I'm going to say that Dead Man's Hand moves forward to the next round. The next round is a tough one as well. We have A Natural History of Dragons, of which I read, I believe, the first 3 books, maybe 2 books, I don't remember, versus Threadlight, of which I've read the first 2 books, but not the 3rd book. A Natural History of Dragons is like, what if Jane from Tarzan, who went to research instead of apes, it's dragons in this one, but what if she had like Jane Austen wit in a society similar to like Jane Austen, where she's critiquing gender roles and different places in society, and she's getting to explore different societies that have different societal norms. It's funny and heartfelt, and there's a lot of really interesting dynamics there that are not present in most of the fantasy that I normally read. This is the type of book that when I read it, I'm enjoying it, and when I finish it, I'm glad that I read it, but I don't necessarily feel myself pining to read the next one. The Threadlight series by Zach Argyle is a hard fantasy magic system sort of inspired by Brandon Sanderson, telling the story of what goes on in his world. The first book starts the tone for the series and introduces you to a lot of interesting characters and interesting scenarios, and while I really enjoyed it, I didn't necessarily love it. The second book in the series, however, I feel like stepped it up in every single way. The characters were more interesting, the plots were more interesting, the world was more developed, the mysteries of the world and the magic, a lot of questions about the magic were answered, and it made it that much more epic and cool. And then there were also even more mysteries introduced, which the mysteries of the magic and fantasy are one of the things that draw me the most. And Stones of Light, book 2 in the Threadlight series, very much so invested me way more in this world than the first book did. So much so that I messaged the author immediately after finishing the second book and asked for an arc, which I haven't got around to reading yet, but that's of no fault to the book or the author. It's me and poor time management. Now this one is hard, and these are my fantasy awards, so I'm going to have to make a decision here, but A Natural History of Dragons is more like a book that I feel like I'm educating myself and learning things by reading. It's more educational. Not that the book is educational, but it's me getting a look at a different style and take of fantasy than I normally would. And I love that fantasy can be broad and explore different themes and styles in that way. But as far as series that I personally am more attached to and care more about, Threadlight is going to win this one. Congratulations to Zach Argyle. The next battle is between the first book, the graphic novel in Brandon Sanderson's White Sand series, which is part of the Cosmere, and it's also, as far as I know, his only foray into graphic novels thus far, maybe? Against A.G. Riddle, one of my favorite indie published authors, and his book Lost in Time, which is a strange take on time travel and parallel universes with a crazy science fiction thriller mystery at the forefront. White Sand gets a lot of criticism for being juvenile and a weird attempt at graphic novels. The thing was that I actually enjoyed White Sand more than I think the average person did. I didn't enjoy it enough to immediately go read the second and third graphic novels, but this was a lot of fun, and it was an introduction to a different style of Sanderson's storytelling because it's got the graphic novel form. There's a lot of really cool art, and also an entirely different magic system that will eventually become relevant in the Cosmere. That being said, it definitely isn't Sanderson's strongest work. The characters don't stick with me as much. The plot isn't as gripping to me as his normal stuff, at least in just the first arc of this graphic novel. But the thing about Lost in Time was it was either a plot hole with the way the science fiction time travel physics worked in the world, or I just couldn't understand it. That being said, I think I had a much better time reading Lost in Time. Even though it wasn't my favorite A.G. Riddle book, it was still a blast, and it was still full of a lot of the things that A.G. Riddle does well, which is really good characters, really good stories, really good plot twists, and it was a really fast-paced book. I always compare A.G. Riddle and Blake Crouch. The thing is that Blake Crouch doesn't always nail the character aspect, like his characters sort of just exist in the plot to move the story forward, and it's breakneck, but often his characters are they're not the best people. Whereas A.G. Riddle is much better at writing characters that you want to root for. I'm going to give this round to Lost in Time by A.G. Riddle. Congratulations, A.G. Riddle moves forward. Anybody that's watched the channel for very long knows that I am a huge A.G. Riddle stan. The next battle is going to be Harrow Lake versus The Stones of Voltara, which moved forward last round. Harrow Lake was a frustrating book for me to read. And I think that there are people that will like Harrow Lake that will have a problem with the way that I perceived the themes and the messages in Harrow Lake. But frankly, this is my book awards and I'm gonna have to do with it what I will. And this is a channel that loves science fiction and fantasy, and I very much love paranormal fantasy when done the way that I want it to be done. I can't just say right, but the way that I want it to be done. This book includes horror elements, which I also can love, especially in my paranormal fantasy. But this book sort of does my least favorite thing possible in this type of story, and I'm going to spoil this, so if you care about Harrow Lake, I will spoil the fact that it teases supernatural elements and then it has nothing to do with supernatural elements. This book is really trying to tell a story about abuse and misogyny, and they're important lessons that want to be told, but they are portrayed in a framework that I think lessens the impact of their actual real life seriousness and couches them in a story that purports to be a horror, paranormal, thriller, fantasy, whatever you want to call it, and then it takes it away and it's like, whoops, we actually tried to tell you a moral lesson here. And that is my least favorite way to learn moral lessons. If you want to try to tell the moral lessons, tell them within the context of the supernatural. Don't tease me with the supernatural and then give me, like, don't, it's like the little parent with the airplane and you put medicine in the spoon and you try to do the air. I'm gonna give this round to The Stones of Voltara, which I talked about last round, but it's really fun and it didn't make me angry, it made me happy. The next round feels quite unfair because it is going to be Hazel Hearth Hire's Heroes versus Cradle by Will White. Hazel Hearth Hire's Heroes was a fun book that was, I think the way that I described it the first time was it's almost like the old classic Christmas movie Santa Claus is Coming to Town that told the origins of Santa Claus's history. This is like the origins of tabletop role-playing games in an alternate universe where they were invented through a portal fantasy. This book was fun, but it also was disappointing. It just didn't click the way that I wanted it to. The characters never registered in my brain as deeply as I wish they would have. There was good humor here, but overall I think the tone was very, very hit and miss. Sometimes it tried to go for a very serious tone, sometimes it tried to go for a very light tone, and it didn't feel like it meshed. Some books are able to do that really well. I personally think that Nicholas Eames with his The Band series actually is able to nail that aesthetic pretty well. Additionally, this book sort of dealt with a lot of familiar tropes to me that aren't my favorite, and so Hazel Hearth Hire's Heroes was a good book for me. It was enjoyable, but also it's against Cradle, which has become, spoilers, one of my favorite series of all time. Will White's The Cradle series is what I wish Dragon Ball Z was. It's a progression fantasy where a character starts at the beginning of a story very weak, essentially useless in society, and he has to find a way to grow, to protect the ones that he loves, and it's handled so well. This is a series that if you just write down what happens from a outline perspective, it's like, well, the character has to meet friends and get stronger to overcome his most current battle challenge or whatever. That doesn't sound that interesting and it doesn't sound that revelatory if you just approach it from that perspective. But the way that it's executed in this series, the way that the progression is handled, and the way that it all makes sense, even with plot twists, even with new characters getting introduced, the way that powers are added and sometimes subtracted, and the way that it is on a scale. This series, and it's an epic fantasy / science fiction series, it's on a scale unknown to the rest of these series, including the Cosmere. It just goes there. It goes there. It's not the deepest thing in the world, but it's way deeper than it has any right to be. It's not the most original sounding premise in the world, but it nails it in a way that it has no right to. There's a mystery and a subplot happening in the background of this series that is just wild, and the way that it somehow makes you care about the smaller plot. When you're talking about a multiple galaxy spanning plot happening, but you still care about the smaller plot, it says something about humanity, and I think it's trying to, but it's couched in the series that I compare to Dragon Ball Z. I flipping love Cradle. There was a period in this channel where I was just hyping Cradle nonstop, and I don't regret it. It is unfortunate that it's against Hazel Hearth Hire's Heroes for this round, but this one's going to Cradle by Will White. Absolute winner, no regrets. Next up, the John Cleaver series versus a book whose title I can almost never remember the full title for. It's The Utterly Uninteresting Tales of Fred the Vampire Accountant. I think I got that right. This is a self-published book about an accountant, which is a boring, regular dude that gets turned into a vampire, and his comedic and hilarious antics as a vampire who just kind of wants to be invisible, a nobody. I think the premise of the book is essentially when you become a vampire, you just become a more extreme version of what you were before. And as an accountant, he just becomes really more normal and boring in some ways than he was before. It's couched in a world with a lot of fun characters and a lot of great humor. On the flip side, John Cleaver is not a world full of great humor. John Cleaver's first book is called I Am Not a Serial Killer, and it's a book about a sociopath who has really bad thoughts and desires and fits a lot of tendencies that often are associated with serial killers, and he just happens to work with his mom as a mortician. So he's constantly around and fascinated by the inner workings of dead bodies. And it turns out when he is confronted in his small town in America with a serial killer, he becomes even more obsessed with his darker tendencies. And this is extrapolated into a 6-book series of paranormal fantasy, horror fantasy that's excellently well done and lives in my head constantly. I constantly think about John Cleaver. It has also become a series that I absolutely love. Dan Wells really nailed the characterization and the exploration of what do you do with a character who you want to root for, but he's a bad person, but he doesn't want to be a bad person, but he definitely does bad things. I think a lot of people would probably compare it to something like Dexter, but it adds a fantasy element that makes me love it a lot more. This was a series that I very much was interested in, and Kate from the Literary Apothecary, which I will link in the description down below, she gifted me this book and I finally got around to reading it, and I binged the entire series in a week or two. And this was during a period where I wasn't reading a lot of books, and then I was like, Amanda, my wife, you have to read this. And she read it and also loved it. John Cleaver, it's a good series. It really makes me want to read more Dan Wells books. So even though I really liked Fred, and I think that it was a lot of fun for what I explored there, John Cleaver has to win this round. And this brings us to the final battle to determine the semi-finalist in the 2022 book battle, The Lunar Chronicles versus Deep's End. Deep's End was another one of the SPFBO 8 books that I judged this year, and it was definitely not one of my favorite books among the selection of books that I was assigned. Deep's End on paper is something that I would absolutely love, with a lot of lore and mystery, but the execution of the book just didn't meet my expectations. Unfortunately, I just feel like Deep's End was an example of a self-published book that could have used more time on the editing floor, getting pieces placed in different places, some parts cut, maybe parts added. There are times when it shows greatness, but most of the time it was a little bit confusing. And it is very different in tone than the Lunar Chronicles. It's very interesting to see a very dark and heavy book being compared and contrasted with the Lunar Chronicles, which is like one of my favorite fairy tale vibes this year, or last year, I suppose. So this is an unfortunate round. It's going to be a quick round. The Lunar Chronicles versus Deep's End. It's definitely going to go to the Lunar Chronicles as one of my favorite books, with Deep's End being one of my lesser favorite books that I read last year. Congratulations to Marissa Meyer with a book that she wrote like a decade ago, maybe more. Frick, I'm old. And with that, we have our semi-finalists. I will read them in order. It is going to be Mistborn Era 2 by Brandon Sanderson, Dead Man's Hand by James E. Butcher, The Threadlight series by Zach Argyle, Lost in Time by A.G. Riddle, The Stones of Voltara by Christopher Clargo, Cradle by Will White, The John Cleaver series by Dan Wells, and The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. Congratulations to the semi-finalists. I applaud you all. I loved your books. I'm probably going to be throwing up some polls for predictions for people to guess what they think is going to move forward into the next rounds. I'm curious what you thought about the books that got cut. Do you think I made any mistakes? Which of these books that I listed do you love most, and which would you like to see win the 2022 book battle bracket? This is already a huge video, so I'm going to be breaking up into 2 parts, which means that you are going to have to come back to see who actually wins the tournament in another video. And the best way to do that would be to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you get notified when the next video is posted. If you liked this video and you had fun with these discussions, please hit that thumbs up button. I can't wait to see you while we get to the finals of the Book Battle Bracket 22 Part 2. Tune in next time. Until then, I love you so much. Goodbye.
No, I never get enough. Always looking out tired, sleep. No one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired, sleep. No one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.